Welcome back to the Historical Movies Podcast, the podcast about historically inspired movies. And in today's episode, Odin! It's the Vikings. I'm Ross Evans. I'm an editor, and I'm joined, as ever, by Professor of Modern History at Liverpool Hope University and historical scriptwriter Bryce Evans. Bryce, how are you doing? I hope you've got your horned helmet on for this one.
Well, that would be inaccurate, wouldn't it? Yes, but no, the sound of the Viking horns has been, since I watched this movie, in my head. Going over and over. Yeah.
Because we're talking about 1958's marvellous movie, budget of $3.5 million, box office $6.2 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's about 40 million costs and a 67 million taking at the box office. IMDb ranks this at a 7, and it was directed by Richard Fleischer with Kirk Douglas as an executive producer. And I think that's key in many ways of understanding what this movie is all about, because Kirk Douglas said that he took the role to fulfill a childhood fantasy of playing a Viking on screen. He took no salary for this film in return for 60% of the profits, and that would equate to about $3 million back in 1958, which is no small sum of money. It's very much a kind of kids version. I don't want to be too disrespectful. I did very much enjoy watching this movie, but it's a little bit like a sort of Kirk Douglas child's version of the Vikings with a sort of Hollywood princess story thrown in. For me, it's the ending of this movie that lets it down, which we'll get onto later.
It's a good example of when something comes to be regarded as a cult classic. What do I like about it? I like Ragnar, actually, because Ragnar looks like, some people will be unfamiliar with this character, but in real life, there's an Irish drug crime lord called Jerry the Monk Hutch. He's quite famous. If people don't know who he is, if you just look up Jerry Hutch, and Ragnar looks incredibly like this contemporary crime lord, Jerry the Monk Hutch. Apart from when he lustily jumps into the pit of vipers or whatever it is, I just didn't really like anything about this movie. And I know that'll probably offend some people for whom this is probably a cherished childhood memory, actually. For some people, that's probably why it has that cult status. But I think sometimes, to come back to that point, with stuff that has got the status of cult classic, we tend to forget that it's actually rubbish, and always was rubbish.
Well, let's maybe not... there's plenty of movies I like from my childhood and still love, which are crap. But it's the individual nature. I think our listeners are mature enough to accept that it's not a personal attack or something. We're just discussing the themes of the movie, and there's going to be differences of opinion on that. So maybe we should get into the history of the Vikings, because we talked about the way that this movie portrays the Vikings, and we should clarify why that might be problematic or might be accurate. So, the Viking Age, which, it's difficult to give exact dates to this, but it's usually given as the attack on Lindisfarne Monastery, which is on the east coast of England in 793, and ending at the Norman invasion in England in 1066. That's a very English-centric view of the period. But this movie is set, it's not clear when it's set, but there was a real king, Aela, who died in 867, and it appears to be set sometime in the 9th century, because at that time, this is a period where in England the Vikings are raiding, and England is divided into these small kingdoms, which are then vulnerable to these raids. So, what did you think then of the history? I think we should also point out that Viking history in general is written by Christians getting raided, or much later in like the 13th century in Iceland and so on, about Vikings who had converted to Christianity, talking about, sort of the good old days. So the view that we've got on Viking history has to be seen through that lens, that it's sort of written, almost all of it is written much later.
Yeah, I like the Icelandic sagas. I kind of like them, though, because they're more about domestic squabbles. They're more like sort of soap operas between sort of settler farmers and blood feuds and that kind of stuff. I'm less keen on the sort of the again, posterity has sort of conferred the Viking rage with a great sort of, well, hey, here we go, lads, and all this kind of thing. When actually, it was really, without wanting to sound like a complete bleeding heart, that they're really very unpleasant. Probably as is depicted here. I'm fascinated by the Viking, the extent of their navigation. Obviously, the settlement of Greenland, of America. Perhaps, and the extent how far east they went. It's incredibly impressive history. I love Norse folklore, of which there's a tribute at the end, of course, with the combat at the end. You're talking about the final scene. You have Odin had one eye and Tyr, the other god, had one hand, and that's what's being depicted there. So I like the folkloric stuff, but I just I find without wanting to sound like tremendously woke, I just find some of this kind of like raiding stuff and lusty, bawdy loincloths and violence. I find it quite boring, actually.
I'm going to use the phrase which, alarm bells will start ringing, of its time. But as I said at the top, this is a sort of a kid's kind of, when you play Vikings as a child, this is kind of the stuff that you do, and that struck me to learn that Kirk Douglas didn't take a fee because he was so desperate to produce a Viking movie, and it's sort of, I think, when we're mentioning Vikings raiding, now that was always the sort of, as you all know, the sort of historical view that they were big raiders, and then there was a sort of pushback against that in more modern times, because they were also, farmers and traders, and then there was a sort of pushback against the pushback that, these are kind of violent raiders. But really, you can't understand the Viking society without talking about the other aspects. It's just that the raiding is the more kind of Hollywood aspect of it. These people actually made most of their money through trading and through trading slaves, which I'm glad is depicted in this movie, because that's something that's, and also a black slave, which is also very interesting.
Well, this is certainly not one for the revisionists, is it? This
no,
but it's also got as well as there's actual quite a few bits of accuracy. I think with the running of the oars, that kind of thing. Although Vikings would have worn trousers, wouldn't they? I'm not sure if that's. I'm not actually quite sure on that point in terms of their attire.
Yeah. Apparently this movie, I don't know is the answer to that, I'm afraid. But they were buried usually in the clothes that they wore, Vikings. So we do know a lot about Viking clothes. I just don't know personally whether they wore trousers. But this movie, the director spent 2 years researching Norse civilization, and the boats are based on Viking boats that had been found in the 50s, the emphasis on stuff they knew in the 50s. They made an effort to make the weapons and clothes. I don't know whether that includes Tony Curtis's fur boots and leather hot pants as accurate to the period.
Tony Curtis is showing quite a bit of bum cheek in this actually throughout, isn't he?
He's rocking a bum cheek, isn't he, in this movie? Yeah. So they did film in Norway, in the fjords. Yeah. So they did make an effort in some respects to give what you could say was an accurate vision of the Vikings in the 50s. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's on location, a beautiful Norway on location, sure. I think actually what my broader point is here, because I'm sounding a little bit flippant about the Vikings, who are very impressive, no matter about the cruelty. I think maybe it's revealing, this movie, of the actual general poverty of the genre of Viking stuff. Because reading a lot of the criticism of this by academics, Sean Hughes contends that this, quote, is still the best film on the Vikings that we have. Surely then that reveals the poverty of the sort of broader Viking genre, not just in movies but in TV series. I don't know if it's a genre which has ever really been well served by sort of historical movies and historical series. In terms of the source material you mentioned there, quite a lot of accuracy, quite a lot of research, based on the 1952 novel The Viking by Edison Marshall. It is, I was reading again about this, so I was thinking about this general poverty of the genre as I would see it. The first Viking film, apparently. It was a British movie, a silent movie in 1907, The Viking's Bride. And the film historian Kevin J. Harty has written a book, The Vikings on Film. So I had a look at that, and he identifies that 1907, The Viking's Bride, as the first Viking film. Also, humorously, Kevin J. Harty coined the term the real Middle Ages, as in film reel, REEL, in discussing it. Bit of Middle Ages humour there. But
historians can make jokes.
If we think about that, my point here is, if we think about the Viking genre as going all the way back to 1907, a contentious point here I'm going to make, and if this is the best that they've produced, then it's a pretty poor genre. In 120 years, this is the best you've done on the Vikings? I mean, I don't know. What do you think about that?
I will admit now that I haven't seen enough Viking films to make which is why I was staying silent while you were speaking. Maybe it's unfair, but maybe this is because we know that the Vikings, in some ways, because of the aspects that have later become prominent, like the heroic individual deciding their own fate, which was picked up by Wagner, and you'll know more than I do about this, and the modern history in Germany in the 20th century and how the Vikings were used. I mean, I live in Germany. There are still lots of Viking stuff that is banned here because it's so associated with the Nazis.
Hitler's Viking funeral, the funeral pyre. Yeah,
indeed. But is there, Hollywood wants to focus on the cinematic aspects. So is there something within the Viking core that Hollywood just focuses on the raiding? They just focus on the rape and pillage. And that really doesn't make up a huge amount of what the Vikings actually got up to. So it's unfair on them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, I would love to, what fascinates me about the Vikings, I'll give a few examples of what I love about that time and those Norse civilizations. And wouldn't it be great to see a movie about you could write a brilliant movie about, for example, the foundation of Greenland and then the disaster that befalls them there. And in all its bleakness and racism of the Vikings, of course, like any other, we discuss this a lot, don't we? The notion of civilization versus barbarism and all the rest. And I just think, the rape and pillage is fine if you're 10 years old. And this is my point here. It's a bit of a childish movie, this one. And I think it's more of a childish movie because it kind of spatchcocks in a lot of these kind of things that are it's sort of like Harry Potter levels of nonsense, like the pommel stone given to the bastard baby by its mother, and this nonsense stone is then carried around his neck, and whoever will get the nonsense stone will be the ruler. It's just sort of go on.
Yeah, it's Hollywood, isn't it? Classic Hollywood 50s Hollywood kind of stories. Yeah. But as I said, they've inserted a kind of lost princess story into the Vikings, and the point, most of this movie, the sets. In England, there are all of these Norman castles. There were stone castles which didn't exist before 1066 in England. But it's the kind of game you'd play as a child. And I don't want to sound cynical, and I don't want to sound negative on the film, but it's the kind of game you play as a kid when you've got a little fort that you're raiding. It's great fun. The Vikings are raiding the fort, but it's not really doing, and maybe it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you go to a Hollywood executive now and say, I want to make a film about the Vikings, about, the downfall of the society in Greenland, they'll probably go, well, the Vikings are about rape and pillage, partly due to films like this, which portray them like that, So it seems to be, in some ways, a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Can we discuss the leading man? We mentioned earlier that, the shadow of Kirk Douglas looms very large over this, doesn't it? What do you think about his performance as a leading man here?
Well, he's obviously enjoying it massively, isn't he? There's a bit where his introduction is he's necking a blonde in the log cabin, and then you hear a horn, which may also be a analogy of sorts. Exactly. And then he slaps her on the arse and runs out the door, and that's the introduction to Kirk Douglas. Well, I think it's probably remiss of us, Bryce, as well, not to talk about the rapiness of this movie, really. I mean, again, we don't want to sound too revisionist or woke, but my God, there are some... The scene in the middle of the movie when Kirk Douglas is talking to his dad, and he says, I want her to fight me tooth and nail the first time I take her and the last. And then he goes off to rape the princess,
Do you think it's... Yeah, and of course you've got beautiful Janet Leigh and her very. And I say this not wanting to sound pervy, but that very 1950s boobs that are very have a very perky sort of triangular shape, and those her breast features very heavily in the movie, which, as you're right, it is a very rapey movie. And I was trying to think to myself, come on, it's of its time. And all the rest.
But even so, I mean, sorry to interrupt, but the plot starts with a Viking raping Tony Curtis's mother, doesn't it? And then that's Tony Curtis is created thus.
Yeah, and again, like, one wouldn't want to be too sort of po-faced about scenes where women are being chucked over the shoulder and all the rest. But yeah, I think even for its time, it's a fairly rapey piece. I mean, we could go. Let's not go on to discuss that in relevance to Kirk Douglas and certain real life allegations, but I think it's probably for maybe for modern audiences it some of that kind of sticks in the craw. I mean, I think with Kirk Douglas himself, I think what has always preoccupied me with Kirk Douglas is his bum chin, his chin dimple. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, have you heard the old joke, how many arseholes... It's terrible, I'm going to tell it, but it is terrible. How many arseholes does Kirk Douglas have? One on his arse, one on his chin, and his son Michael.
Wow. Yeah. Well, look, on the subject of Kirk Douglas, I mean, look, for years, the global scientific community was preoccupied with the central question of Kirk Douglas is he ever going to die? And on the 5th of February 2020, sadly, he did die.
103 or something?
146. And subsequently, obviously, the focus of the global scientific community has shifted, actually, now that he has died, to the biomedicine of his chin dimple. So there's a lot been written about his chin dimple, also known as a chin cleft, in Latin, mentum galacinus, or in playground, bum chin. So, on his death, you mentioned the family, and I was just researching this before we come on the permission of the family, including Michael, his son, a notable actor, of course, Michael Douglas, they gave permission to scientists to carry out excavations on Kirk Douglas's corpse, and particularly on the bum chin. And some astounding discoveries were made inside his bum chin. It was discovered, and I'm quote here, that Kirk Douglas's bum chin, deep within the crevice, was home to over 30 million species of plants and animals. That's more than the rainforest. It was also discovered, and I quote again, this is Wikipedia, when they carried out the autopsy, that when Alexander Fleming, the famous scientist, accidentally discovered the chemical that could kill bacteria, i.e. penicillin, in 1928. That was actually by accidentally leaving mould growing in a petri dish while he was on holiday. Everybody knows that, sure. But he'd actually left the petri dish in Kirk Douglas's bum chin, tucked deep in the caverns of Kirk Douglas's bum chin. And I quote, "The mould successfully festered at the perfect temperature." So it did have its own sort of biosphere within the bum chin. It created the conditions in which it actually prevented the bacteria around it from developing. So there's actually a whole sort of biomedical angle to Kirk Douglas's bum chin, which I think is equally fascinating in itself, like in terms of the history of medicine.
You read that on Wikipedia, did you?
I'm reading it now from Wikipedia.
Did you edit that page on Wikipedia by chance?
No, it wasn't me, Gov.
Bryce, thank you very much for that wonderful journey into
history of medicine.
History of medicine. Thank you, which will be known to GCSE students across England. The ending of this movie, I have to talk about that before we get on to our questions we ask of every movie, which for me, I found really let this movie down.
Well, that's interesting because a lot of people say it's the best bit. Like, a lot of people love the ending of this movie, don't they? And again, because of the Norse mythological references.
I actually prefer the rest of the movie to the ending because, because he kind of Kirk Douglas hesitates and then Tony Curtis sort of stabs him in the stomach. He's portrayed as sort of being a bit cowardly. Will he make a great king? And then I don't understand that. I know he just finds out that they're half brothers, doesn't he? Before, but what happens afterwards? Please, movie. We get the last two shots of this movie are of Kirk Douglas's Viking burial, a close-up of him and the ship's burning, and then a wide shot of his ship burning. And I'm thinking, hang on a second, aren't we supposed to be celebrating Tony Curtis winning at the end of this movie? Why are we focusing on the baddie? I mean, I suppose it's different, isn't it?
That's part of the issue of the movie, isn't it? You can't decide really, is Kirk Douglas the hero? Is he an anti-hero? Is he the villain, or is he the hero? He's genuine, actually, to give it its due, this movie. When his disfigurement is revealed, like the eye has been gouged out by that bird, that actually, I still find that genuinely scary.
Yeah.
When you see, and he had to wear a contact lens, didn't he?
Which apparently was very painful, and he could only wear it for like a couple of minutes at a time.
But you didn't like the ending.
No, I don't like it. I don't understand why we're focusing on Kirk Douglas. I thought Tony Curtis was the hero, and we don't find out what happens later, because this movie starts with a brilliant 1950s style voice of God narration, and then anachronistic bio tapestry images, which
by Orson Welles. By
Orson Welles, of course. Yeah. Oh, I forgot. Yes, of course. Orson Welles does the voiceover, not the tapestry design. But then I thought at the end we'd get a sort of postscript saying, first of all, I thought that Kirk Douglas would see the error of his ways, and him and Tony Curtis would rule over England together. I actually thought that's what the ending was going to be.
Hang on, you thought that this, as you've described him yourself, rapey, manic, violent Viking is going to become a sort of benevolent, some sort of, benevolent, like the Green Party in the UK having co-leaders. He's going to become a benevolent co-leader.
Yes.
Really? Yeah,
yes.
okay. Right.
That's what I was expecting. Needless to say, I was disappointed. No, but I just found, the focus... we focused all this time on the Tony Curtis princess story, and then at the end we seem to revere Kirk Douglas's baddie character more than the others. I just found it confusing, and then I saw the credits, and it says right there, a Kirk Douglas production, and I thought,
well, that says it all, doesn't it? I think that's one of the reasons why I don't really like this movie, is because it's just all about Kirk. This, as I've said before, should be renamed the Mel Gibson podcast. It's like when you watch a Mel Gibson movie, for better or worse, it is all about, in capital letters, Kirk, Mel Gibson, or in this case, Kirk Douglas. And I suppose then it probably comes down to whether or not you really kind of like Kirk Douglas. I don't really. I'll admit, I never sort of really like.
Well, he's been in some of my favourite films, but I've never really thought about,
such as
Paths of Glory and Spartacus, both Kubrick.
Yeah.
I love both those films. We have to do Spartacus at some point, Bryce.
Well, in some ways, yeah. No, sorry, go on.
I was going to move on to our questions. Are you ready, or have you got something else? Yeah?
No, I'm ready. Yeah, you're going.
Yeah. Our trivial trivia for this episode is actor Eileen Way, who plays the soothsayer woman, wouldn't shoot outside while it was raining, so a local girl replaced her for those shots.
She is a very annoying character. I think I've mentioned when we do 10,000 BC, where there's a similar annoying soothsayer, smelly old cat lady sort of character. So did she not film outside because she herself was highly superstitious, or just because she was a diva?
Don't know. That's why it's trivial trivia, because the interesting part is not revealed. It's no idea.
Right, okay.
She wouldn't shoot outside. Why? Don't know.
She's highly annoying, isn't she, with her runes?
Yeah, she is, to be fair. So that wouldn't be your favourite character or performance then, Bryce? But who was? Was it Ernest Borgnine? Is that how you say his name? I never know how to pronounce his name.
Is that Ragnar?
Yeah.
Well, yes, it's got to be Ragnar. I mean, Ragnar is got to be, it's the sort of role Brian Blessed was born to play, isn't it? It's as I've said before, when he sort of, it's a great way to go when he jumps lustily into the pit of rabid dogs or whatever nonsense. I think in real life, in the saga, it's vipers, isn't it? So yeah, he's got to be my favourite character as the stereotypically overblown fat, and kind of Falstaffian, violent Viking. Yeah.
And also 6 weeks younger than Kirk Douglas, although he's playing his dad, which is amazing.
You're kidding, really? Well,
yes,
okay.
Because usually, we often talk about, it's very common, the one that always sticks in my head is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where Sean Connery is 11 years older, I think, than Harrison Ford. And you think that's biologically doable, probably just. But, when you've got six weeks younger playing his dad, it's quite impressive, isn't it?
Doesn't look at that, because of course Kirk is blonde, isn't he? He's very sort of blonde and he's very kind of Aryan, dare I say.
Yeah, there we go. Of course, well, let's not go down that particular path. Right. I didn't really Tony Curtis in this movie. He's a bit he's menacing, I suppose, isn't he? A bit cowardly. Probably would make a good king. But I think my favourite performance in this movie is Frank Thring, who gives an unbelievably theatrical performance as King Aela. He's playing it's like he's doing a silent movie at some points. He's sort of hiding around the corner like a Nosferatu or something at some points in this movie.
I don't know actually anything about that actor, but I agree it's very much this sort of there's a great English satirical comic which I read called Viz, and there is a character in Viz called Lovey Darling, and Lovey Darling, the show must go on, love is that kind of thing.
The smell of grease paint,
yes,
that kind of thing.
I would imagine your man is very much of that stable.
Well, there's a great scene, so he was my favourite, and there's a great scene when the English lord is escaping at the beginning, and it's completely ridiculous. They go down to the cell where he's being held, and he says, careful. So this is the bad King Aela says, it must look as if he took his own life. And then this guy comes out and says, oh, he's gone. Like he's escaped. And then he says, bring me his head. As if, how are you going to make it look like he decapitated himself? It doesn't make any sense, but it's great fun.
Apart from the massive plot holes in this movie, there's obviously a sub-theme here about the... baddies on screen. I think we've discussed this before, and obviously of this era and since, the camp English baddie is the staple, isn't he? We've discussed this in terms of why certain movies work and don't work, but for American audiences, of course, the camp English villain is very much the staple baddie. I think in terms of best actor, you might be overlooking one notable, if I may.
Yeah.
Norway.
Yes. Oh no, it's a good point.
Yeah.
Very, very, very good point. It's beautiful, isn't it? I've written down where it was shot, if people want to go and visit. It was.
Where is it shot? Please tell us. Please share with the listeners. Go on.
It's shot in Kvinnherad. I butchered that probably. And in...
God bless you.
Danger Fjord. So we'll give the best performance.
Hard Danger Fjord. Have you just made that up? Like hard men hang out. Oh, Hardanger. Okay.
Hardanger Fjord. Okay. So what was your favourite scene, Bryce? Have we mentioned it already? But mine is, as you've mentioned, Ragnar jumping in. Oh, it's dogs actually. Is it dogs or snakes?
Yeah, but in that again our requirement to actually talk about historical accuracy in the sagas, it's vipers. But yes, here I think it's rabid dog. It's yelping dogs, isn't it?
Yeah, that's my favourite scene when he jumps in. Let me die like a Viking.
It's my favourite scene as well. It's a great scene. It's just a great way to go.
Yeah,
Whoop,
isn't it?
There we are.
Well, we enjoy talking about great ways to go. I remember our wonderful chat about dear old Gladiator.
Oliver Reed.
Oliver Reed, yes, of course. Wonderful.
Arm wrestling HMS Northumberland or whatever it was, yeah.
Yes, brilliant. So I think that's our favourite scenes. I mean, I do like when the boat is quite early on, I think, and the boat comes in and you hear that horn for the first time. And there's beautiful shots of that village. I mean, it's got wide shots in that kind of 50s epic style. It's fantastic. Oh, and the other scene I love is when the Vikings come to England, which is actually, I think, filmed in France. And there's English peasants there tilling the fields. Do you remember that? And then they're sort of like, oh no, it's the Vikings. And then they start running away. And then there's like this little montage of like villagers going, it's the Vikings, it's the Vikings.
Again, run for your lives.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? I did enjoy that.
What did you think about the a big bugbear of mine is child actors. Now, this film mercifully isn't plagued by the affliction of child actors, but you do have in those Viking village scenes a few little blonde kids romping about, with sturdy little lads romping about in reindeer skin panties and that kind of stuff. What do you think about
No problem for me. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good.
All good. Don't know if it's historically accurate, but all good.
Yeah.
What part with Mel Gibson play, Bryce, is the next question.
Well, he quite obviously played the Kirk Douglas. I've actually forgotten the name of Kirk Douglas's character.
Einar.
Sorry.
Einar.
That's the fundamentals of recording a podcast. You should know the name of it. Yeah, I think quite clearly he would play that role. Sure. Well, then again, Mel likes to be the unambiguously good goody, doesn't he? The reluctant hero.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe it would be Curtis then.
It could be, and he would play him with the bum cheek, flashing the sort of bronzed bum cheeks. Again, we'll leave that up to the fates. Had that occurred, will that occur? There's still time. Mel's still
remake,
with us, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe he must be in his mid-60s now. He could do one better on Kirk Douglas playing a 20-year-old in his 40s.
Still time.
Who should do the DVD commentary? Should it be the lad who wrote the Icelandic sagas? I've forgotten his name. He's got quite a...
Sturri Sturluson.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah, what's his name?
Well, they're not all written by the same person.
No, but he wrote a lot of them, didn't he?
Yes, is it not Stuart? I'm mispronouncing it. This has been a terrible mispronunciations episode. Is it Sturri Sturluson, I think? I've just got to look this up. Sorry, please talk amongst yourselves.
I'll put in some sort of lift music.
Snorri, yeah, do. Snorri Sturluson. Apologies.
Snorri Sturluson, you've got it, have you?
Snorri Sturluson. Yeah, I mispronounced that terribly. Snorri Sturluson.
Okay. What's the best companion film? You said maybe it's a pretty difficult one because there's not such a lot of... there's not a huge amount of films that do anything very much different from this. I did read that the cinematography of this movie, a guy called Jack Cardiff, made in the 60s a movie called The Long Ships.
Okay, haven't seen it.
Involving a perilous journey across the sea to find a legendary giant golden bell. And they're captured by Moorish forces led by the determined Prince El Manchu. I can imagine maybe... blackface plays a part in that movie. I don't know. We'll maybe get around to watching that on the podcast at some point.
Well, I would refer you once again to Kevin J. Harty's The Vikings on Film, 2011.
Okay,
go on.
Sorry, I've got a left field option, and there's actually a video game called Expeditions Viking, which, if you like this, will give you a lot of satisfaction. So a left field one, a computer game. Hall of Fame, Bryce. What are we putting in the Hall of Fame?
Well, I wouldn't want to be so base as to say Janet Leigh's perky 1950s boobs.
Wonder bra.
So without wanting to be base, I would why don't we put in there the nonsense stone, as I like to call it. Was it the pommel stone? The pommel stone.
I had either the giant horn that guy blows when a boat arrives or leaves.
Yeah, that is good, yeah.
Just put in a horned helmet, because this movie is in that kind of vein, isn't it? Of that kind of view of the Vikings, where, they're just going around raiding everybody.
This is my central point here. It's quite remarkably accurate in some ways. Like it must have been absolute, it must have been a sort of akin to the sort of nagging desire of a reformed drug addict to put in horned helmets into this movie, but they resisted that, and at the same time they mounted the most sort of childish nonsense plot of all time. So why don't they just go all, to use a terrible expression, sort of balls out and actually go horned helmets and the whole 9 yards.
Helmets and all.
You know what I mean? Why sort of make a pretense to accuracy within such a terribly juvenile sort of framework?
I think, and I don't know the answer to this, but is this because you said it was based on a book from the early 50s.
Yes, 1952.
Is this the best available information about the Vikings from the 50s? I suspect not.
Edison marshals the Viking. No, because, again, you're the archaeologist, but sure, they had, you know, I know a lot of the discoveries were subsequently made through digs, haven't they, post-50s, but there was actually quite a lot of archaeological evidence, I believe, even at this stage, surely.
Yeah.
Late 50s. Anyway.
Well, they would have known they've, gone to places like Constantinople and Greenland, and they knew that the civilization wasn't just raiding, which is what you would learn from just reading medieval monks, unsurprisingly, who were being raided. Yeah.
The St. Lawrence River, didn't they? Of course, allegedly, yeah.
What would happen in the sequel, if there was one?
Well, I think I want to know what the benevolent rule of the co-leaders.
The Viking co-leaders. Yes. So have you got anything for Sude's Corner? This is a bit early for our best friend in this department, Peter Bradshaw, isn't it, in The Guardian?
There's nothing from Bradders this week.
Was he even born in 1958?
I don't think it's Sude's Corner, but to go back to the notion of this is Sean Hughes quote, still the best film on the Vikings. Surely not. Then again, I have to hold my hands up. I'm not terribly familiar with the genre, apart from what I've read in the Harty book. I haven't looked at a lot of these movies, but if this is the best they can do, sounding a little bit like Roy Keane here, exasperated.
Come on,
senior players.
Yeah. I've got a good pedant's corner for this. Go on. If we can get a sponsorship from moviemistakes.com, that would be great, because this is where I'm getting these mistakes from. In one scene, Ragnar is lying down with a half-eaten pear on his chest. That pear is obviously of the variety Conference, which was developed by Thomas Francis Rivers in England in the late 1800s. Ergo, almost 1,000 years later than the events of that are shown, supposed to be taking place in this movie. So, factually incorrect pear.
I really like that. I really, really like that. As an American politician would say, I approve this message.
And so finally, Bryce, drum roll, please. What did you give this out of 10?
I've given this a 3 out of 10.
So is that your joint lowest score? I think, didn't you give 10,000 BC the same? Or
no, I think I gave 10,000 BC 0.5, I think.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Begrudgingly.
I've given this a 6.
Okay,
out of 10.
It's a romp. Sure, it's a romp, isn't it?
It is a romp, yeah. And as I said, I think it... I'd only watched this I've only watched individual scenes before watching the whole thing, which I did on the way to Munich in a car. So, anyway...
Very good.
There we go. That's today's trivial trivia. So thanks very much, Bryce. That was the Vikings. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we will see you in the next episode of the Historical Movies Podcast. Odin. That's it for this episode of the Historical Movies Podcast. Don't forget to leave us a review on your chosen podcast platform. Spotify and Apple Podcasts make a huge difference to the algorithm. And if you're on YouTube, don't forget to leave a comment or a like or subscribe. Thanks very much for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.